give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? Welcome. It's February 2023.
It's my birthday month.
Yay, happy birthday. Yay. You're celebrating with all of us Black folks all around the way. Because February in the United States is also Black History
Month. Yes. The shortest month out of the year, but let's not go there yet, And
there's some that would say that, the celebration of Black history and also the contributions to the building of the United States is every day, all the time. So
it is.
It's really though special to be able to have designated period of time where we do a lot of concentrated programmings and conversations and amplification of the leaders that we have during this month. So I appreciate having a special time and a special month to elevate that. But I do want to ask you what your history is with Black History Month.
I don't have much of a history. I mean,
well, why is that?
Well, no. I mean, we didn't talk about it. I don't remember ever hearing about it when I was in school.
That's wild to me. That's absolutely amazing.
Didn't know anything about it. I mean, I am 57 years old, so it was a while ago that I was in school, and I don't know. I don't even know when it started. Do you know when it officially started?
Look a deep Dave. No, I don't. I don't know the history of Black History Month because it's always been, a part of my life and a part of my world. And doing my parenting, I always made a big deal out of it, specifically because of your responsiveness. Like, I don't have a history of Black History Month. And then who is responsible for sharing the information and amplifying the leadership? When my young people were in school, I used to always print out a document of Black inventions and give it to the teacher. And if you print out a document of the Black inventions, majority of the things that are critical to our existence in the U.S. were patented and created by Black Americans. And so, like things like the elevator shaft,
the
light, the little chips that we're using for phones, like all kinds of amazing, like combs. Things that are very practical and extremely useful. And a lot of folks never, ever knew that. So typically in the US during schools, if a school is celebrating it, and I think that law has changed in Florida in particular, but celebrating and acknowledging Black History Month, they normally would say, write some type of paragraph or have to give some presentation on some Black leader. And a majority of the time, those would be entertainers, or it would be like the quintessential Martin Luther King.
Right.
Or it would be, an Oprah Winfrey or something like that. And so I thought that it would be interesting for teachers to have the resource. And most of the teachers didn't have that either, but have the resource of all of these magnificent inventions created by and patented by Black Americans.
I've learned all of that information in my later adult years. In the past, I mean, I think I learned some stuff before, but definitely in the past 10 years during what I call my awakening, has definitely been a higher level of learning around that. And,
what did that look like? What did that look like when you said, oh, I've learned all of those things? Like, what was the process of uncovering that knowledge for you?
Listening to Black people in my community and in my algorithms and in my circles, learning from listening to the names and then doing more research to learn about folks. Of late, we've been having more movies and documentaries made about some of these folks that really were pivotal in inventions and things. You were just talking about innovation. Henrietta Lacks, I didn't know anything about her until that movie came out, and she's the woman whose stem cells have led to many, many, many cures of diseases, because she had these cells that wouldn't die. They didn't die from diseases and from bacteria and from things. So they used her cells to study a lot of the diseases that were out and about to create cures. And her family was never compensated. She was never compensated. Her family was never compensated for the immeasurable difference that her stem cells made in the development of medicine and what we consider to be more common cures today. So yeah, it was really just listening and asking the questions, like realizing that I didn't know this stuff was like the first thing. And then connecting myself to people who did know about these things, asking questions, listening. I think, the advent of the internet has helped a lot in me being able to even connect to, because there was a time in my life where I did not have any Black people I was about to say people of color. I'm trying to stop doing that. But I didn't have any Black people in my immediate vicinity that I was learning from, which is, I know, will not be surprising to anybody that doesn't look like me. But now, that's a totally different story. So yeah, I just had to learn that I didn't know, which I know sounds bizarre, but I didn't know that I didn't know that there was so much out there that I didn't know. And then when I realized that there was a lot I didn't know, then I would have to be intentional about knowing and learning and asking people that knew more than me. But the crux or the start of that was learning that I didn't know.
That is it. Well, now you know, and I think that's what's more important. And a lot of people probably don't know, but I put in our notes is a link to a document out of University of California at San Diego, which I also have a little bit of love space for because that's one of my young people graduated from there. But it's a wonderful document that kind of lists some of the things. And I always like to go over this because when we're talking about Black inventions, to like literally just kind of read off some of the names. I don't know if you want to put it on screen, but I'll start.
Yeah, I'm loading it up right now so that I can share it.
So I'm just going to name some of them: paper, chess, alphabet, medicine, civilization, the aeroplane propelling, the coin changer, a letterbox, the corn planter, cotton planter, ironing board, street sweepers, horse bridle, the horseshoe, the typewriter, ice, shoes, gas mask, the elevator, folding chairs, dust plans, the baby buggy, helicopter.
Oh, the folding chair? Are you kidding me? The folding chair?
The folding chair, blood plasma, and the folding chair is pretty funny.
That is funny, yeah.
The telephone system, transmitter, the mop, refrigerators, electric lamps, bottle caps, the internal combustion engine, 2-cycle gas engine, air conditioning unit, egg beaters, eye protectors, the kitchen table. And I want to laugh about that because we have this narrative about the kitchen table in the United States.
Yes, we did.
Hair curlers, lanterns, photo embossing, the photo print machine, a doorknob, a doorstop. I mean, literally all of the things that that we find as necessities, a toilet, a place to be able to, and we already know about, like, during slave times, soap, teaching people how to wash and things like that. And it's just like the celebration of all of the contributions that African Americans, Black Americans, however you want to label and identify it, have contributed to the world is really tremendous. And that hence the need for us to be having Black history so that these things can be brought up, so that this dialogue can happen across community and can be celebrated and also honored and thanked for these contributions, rather than pitting us as communities in the narrative that we hear our administration across this last year.
Thank you for sharing that PDF for those listening and watching. I'll make sure that that gets added to our resources list on our link tree. So if you go to our YDGF YouTube or Instagram or our website, there's a link to our link tree, and I list resources below there. So if you want to come find this PDF, I'll have it listed up there. Yeah.
The question is, how would you exist without us? That's the question.
That's the question. Very,
As Project
very good
2025 is
question.
going forward, this is kind of like a ridiculous strategy because without us, life would look a lot like, being in the caves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is. And then how many white people came in behind these inventions and stole the patents, stole the information, interrupted the patent process to be able to claim it as their own. I mean, that's the other side of the story, which, not to be punitive, but it's an important part of the process. It's not just that these amazing inventors invented these things that we now rely on for everyday use, but it's all a part of the history of America, of the US, of this country stealing those patents and stealing the recognition for the invention of those things from the people that actually did it. So to me, it's
And I
not
think
only
there's a sentiment about stealing, and also I'd like to contextualize the time where
okay.
none of the things could actually be brought
Be
to community because it was made by somebody who was not considered to
a
have the
human.
capacity
Right.
to consider it. So yes, it is actually technically stealing, and also contextually within the time frame, it just wouldn't have had another way to actually be introduced.
Right.
Today, having this information hidden when we know that folks are, coding technology and giving
Mm.
us, the different resources that we need to continue to evolve in the way that we are. I would hold that a little bit more steadfastly than the way that the U.S. was, operating in the past. And the other
Right.
thing is that I'm really holding the belief that these inventors wanted to share this with the world to make their lives easier, because again, this is the people who were doing the things that were everyday tasks and duties.
Right.
And so they were creating and inventing things to actually make their lives easier and to produce better, so that they had less negative impact from those people who had more power and control over their lives.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Black History
So
Month.
So yeah, Black History Month. Well, it's American History Month.
History.
It's USian History Month. I mean, Black history is U.S.
U.S.
history,
history.
and I remember when I realized or learned, or it dawned on me that having a month dedicated to Black history is ludicrous in and of itself, even though it's
Mhm.
intentional. I mean, it's necessary, and I'm
Okay,
not
hold on. You just said that, and I don't want people to take that wrong, right?
right.
So,
I'm trying to qualify it. Yeah, that's not what I meant. That's not. I
because
don't
coming
mean that
out of
it's
a
not
white voice saying
necessary.
that it's
No,
like
I'm not erasing
ludicrous,
it.
is that
I'm not trying to
okay?
erase it. I'm just trying to show the other side of that piece, that I mean, it's important to have the month because it's important for us to talk about these things, and we know that the current administration has been talking about erasing that month and
Absolutely.
canceling that month. And so
Mhm.
I don't even know
And
at
they
the time
have.
that we're right. And at the time of this recording, we haven't necessarily I haven't identified all of the ways in which Black History Month is not going to be able to be celebrated and honored in the way that
Mhm.
it has in past years because of this current administration. And so
Well,
I
I
think
can
that's
name those. It's
yeah,
not going to
yeah,
be.
please.
They're not going to have the Black History celebrations in the universities, not
Right.
in the elementary schools, not at the
Mhm.
workforce, because that's considered DEI. And so, if you're not doing it in the major places where people spend their time, then it's not going to be celebrated in the same way. Of course, in Black communities, well, let me not generalize, but there is a certain pride and confidence with knowing how much contribution has already had. I
Yes.
really believe the outward facingness of the celebration is to help other people recognize and celebrate with us how much contribution there has been.
Right, right, right.
Mhm.
The fact that the greater society of the US does not see Black history as USian history is the reason we need Black History Month. And
Right.
so yeah, I was not suggesting that we don't need it. I'm just suggesting that
I was just helping you with social media.
It's a part of the lexicon. Yeah, I put my foot in my mouth. Thank you.
You would be
Thank you
canceled.
thank you for opening my mouth and inviting me to take my foot out of it. I appreciate that. That's always good. Because
I just know how it can be
happens.
heard and interpreted, and coming from
Right.
a white woman saying this.
No, I know.
That
I'm not all lives mattering
it.
it.
We need right
Yeah.
before Black History Month comes. Somebody
No.
finds that, and then the next thing
Yeah.
we know, we might be popular, but it will be misconstrued
For the wrong
completely.
reasons.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I'm not all lives mattering it. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that it's it's a thing. So yeah, I
the point
wish
is for the knowledge to be integrated into
right.
our history.
And we're not there yet.
Our understanding, and
We're
we're
not there yet.
actually moving away from that.
Away
area.
from it. Yeah. So until that happens, we need every moment to honor and learn from. And so I was asking you, like, what was the timeline of the creation of Black History Month? And
Yes.
I did a little bit of Googling.
Let's talk about it. Good.
Yeah. So I know I'm using Google, which is not the thing that I know we want to use anymore, but sometimes it's useful. So I'm sharing on the screen for those who are listening. I'll just read the key milestones. So in 1926, Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Month, or History Week, excuse me, was celebrated in February to honor Black contributions. And that was in 1926. And Carter G. Woodson was a historian. And then in 1970, the first Black History Month celebration occurred at Kent State University, which I think is interesting because isn't Kent State was the site of that shooting, one of the first school shootings that we can remember, where the police went after, they were protesting. The kids were protesting, weren't they?
Okay, I'm not remember on a call.
Yeah. And then 1976, President Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month, urging USCians to acknowledge Black achievements. And then in 1986, which is the year that I graduated high school, Congress passes a law officially designating February as National Black, in parentheses, Afro-American History Month.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that would somewhat explain why.
You said 76, that was.
1986 was when Congress passed the law officially designating. So that was the year I graduated high school. So I guess that would speak to why, besides the fact that I went to a private school that was predominantly white, and they probably wouldn't have done it anyway, even if it had. But 1986 was when it was officially passed that we would have February would be National Black History Month.
So other than like kind of white male leadership in studies in school, were there any other communities that were uplifted and amplified, like women? Were there, and you were in
North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Very small, segregated town in North Carolina. I don't remember. Nowadays, any given day is a national ice cream day. We have so many people love to celebrate things in a national day of, or an international day of. I don't remember any of that stuff happening when I was in school. I don't remember hearing about Women's Month, or now we have Sexual Abuse Survivor Month. We have, there's
Asian Pacific Islander.
Yeah. And some might say that can be intentional too, to water it all down so that nobody pays attention to any of it anymore, because it becomes part of the chaos and the noise. But I don't know.
That's so interesting. Yeah. It's just helping me to think about my schooling in regards to Black history. Again, that was integrated into my upbringing. So I had that, and I did go to a private, you would consider predominantly white, all girls Catholic school, Sacred Heart. Okay. Shout out to Sacred Heart and the Sisters of the Sacred Heart.
I'm learning some more about you.
But we did do those celebrations because I always had to do my report on some fantastic person. I remember one year doing Vanessa Williams, but I also dressed as her for Halloween because she had won Miss America, and that was like transformative, the first beautiful Black woman.
I do remember that time.
So she was celebrated the whole entire year that time. I guess I just aged myself. Okay.
Hey, I've been saying my age all along, so and you're younger than me, so
That's all right. That's good.
it's all good.
So, but yeah, but the Sisters of the Sacred Heart, their ideology was probably a lot more inclusive, faith-based training and understanding. So we did that, and then we were in San Francisco on top of the hill. So we did learn about a lot of Asian Pacific Islanders, and because there's a lot of Asian community in San Francisco. And we also learned a lot about the indigenous population that existed before the land was colonized in that area. So I am extremely appreciative about having that confidence instilled and that representation of my existence during that time in my education was really important for me. Yeah, it was. And then going into high school, I sat in leadership in community. So, I did my thing.
I know you did.
Sure everybody was celebrating everybody appropriately, especially being in a community that was predominantly wealthy and white. So
I'm sitting here thinking about what did I learn? Like what was it was there something that was a celebration. Of course, everything I learned was a celebration of whiteness, but growing up in it was, but growing up in North Carolina, I'm remembering all the emphasis on the Civil War. And on the Confederate leaders, several of which are my ancestors. And
celebrating your people too. There's nothing wrong with that.
They were.
Yeah.
They were celebrating my people. And that's what's coming to mind for me in terms of learning specifically about a group of people that were considered to have done good things, or big things. It was mostly surrounding the Confederate connection to North Carolina. And I don't know if would have been different had I been in a different region of the United States, but
because the learning is all different wherever you come from.
I would think,
especially in the U.S., because they really focus on the state that you're in and kind of celebrating what they consider achievements happening in that state. What I'm curious about, though, with you, Diane, is that as you became aware that there were contributions other than your ancestors to U.S. history, did you feel like? What did you feel like? I don't want to plant seeds of what you could have felt like, but what did you feel like learning this information? Because I know that as I was parenting my young people and we were talking about things like navigation, and I was like, yeah, you learn this in school, but let's go look up who was really, helping people navigate on these ships and find out, that it was somebody, out of the African continent that had, because they had been sailing for much longer than folks that were traveling all the way across from Europe to try to go through the Middle Passage. So, and they would be shocked and actually angered that wasn't included in the curriculum that they were learning in school. And then of course they would go back to school and with their teachers and be like, well, why didn't we talk about this? And the teachers were always in a cotton mouth at that point, because they didn't have that information to be able to share with the students at all. So they would be appreciative that my young people were coming in respectfully to be able to share additional information into the content.
So your question to me was, I want to make sure.
How did you feel when you realized that you weren't given all of the information about the history and that of your ancestors?
So, I mean, I remember attributing it. It wasn't surprising to me. It wasn't oh my gosh, I can't believe, I was like, of course we didn't learn. I don't remember how old I was, if that was part of my awakening or it was before that I knew about the intentional narrative around the lost cause. And again, I'm coming from a Southern region mindset because that's where I grew up.
Help people understand what the lost cause is, and that is speaking about the South.
So lost cause was the narrative that was woven after the Civil War. So the South, the slave owning states lost the Civil War essentially. And the Emancipation Proclamation came through, and the drastic changing of the landscape of what was happening in the southern slave owning states once the Emancipation Proclamation came through.
So the economy of slavery was dismantled, and here we go.
Yes, well, essentially. I mean,
Kind of.
it wasn't really, but it morphed.
It works. I appreciate
As
that.
it stood before the Civil
Mhm.
War, it was different. So yes,
Yes.
it shifted. But
I-
what happened with the specifically the United Daughters of the Confederacy, which was a women led organization, they were very
All white
intentional.
women.
I'm sorry. Yes, all white women, United Daughters of the Confederacy, no black faces in that group. And they were very concerned and wanting to craft the
Preserve.
storytelling around what happened during the Civil War, why it happened, and what happened afterwards. And so they got a hold of the ability to implement. So the lost cause is the story that they came up with.
Mhm.
And that's a general statement of the story that was woven. And that story made it into the textbooks intentionally so that generation after generation after generation would learn this narrative about what happened, that the South didn't really lose, that it wasn't
Mhm.
really about slavery, that that's why Southerners, I grew up hearing that it was the War of Northern Aggression, not the Civil
Mhm.
War. I mean,
Oh, I love
that
how
was
you said that
yeah,
accent.
yeah, that's where
Love it.
my mint julep sitting on the, in the hoop skirt, that's when it comes out. The War of Northern Aggression. So that, I mean, that's what it was called when I was growing
Yeah.
up in the South.
No, it's
They
just,
called it the War of Northern Aggression. And that the South really won the war. That was the other
mhm.
narrative, even though if you knew even a modicum of history, you would know that that's not true, because we would still be in chattel slavery, would still be enacted if they had won, but they needed to save face. And so
Absolutely.
they needed to save face, and they needed to, I believe that they knew that they were laying the foundation for slavery to continue, just in different forms, which is what I know now. It's not what I
Mhm.
knew back then. So,
Yeah, the
so that's
impact
what
of
the
that.
lost cause was.
That is, and the impact of that, how powerful it was, is that it really romanticized the South, right? Rather than
Yes.
vilifying the South. And it's
Yes.
interesting because I romanticized the South. I know I did. I always was talking about, as I grow older, I want to move to Louisiana and I want to have my home and I want to actually die in a rocking chair sipping mint julep. You know what I'm saying? Because
Mint
like that
juleps.
was like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? That was like the wonderful fairy tale of
Yes.
existing with this type of USian Americanized, and that's even coining what Americanism is, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Coming out of the core of the South, because the South actually does set the standard for how the US actually exists. People think that it's the North, and it is actually not the North. The South actually holds the most power and the most USian cultural ideology that actually moves forward. And we see that today in what our administration is trying to talk about when they're talking about making America
Make
great again,
America great again.
going back
Yes.
to that kind of Southern genteel
Yes.
existence where white people held the power and everyone
Always held the
else
power.
served that power. And so that is what that is why it's really important for us to be celebrating and amplifying all of the contributions, so that we're not only thinking about the contributions of Black identified people in the United States as just serving white power, but also
Right.
contributing to the way that we exist today with all of the utility of the wonderful inventions that they've created.
I want to give a shout out to one of my greatest teachers. She's a friend of
Mhm.
mine that lives in Charleston, South Carolina, Tamika Gadsden.
All right.
And she's amazing. And I have learned so much from her. She's the director of sustainability for the city of Charleston now, which I'm so excited for her about. But she taught me a lot about unpacking those narratives and breaking down and seeing through. But she also coined a phrase, I think she coined it, I'm going to give her credit for it, called the antebellum industrial complex, because at the time I was living in Charleston, which deeply relies on the antebellum storytelling for their tourism, for their, they heavily rely on all of that. I mean, I didn't learn until about a year before I moved up to the north that the cobblestone streets, you probably know this, the cobblestone streets in Charleston, and I think also that can be attributed in NOLA as well in New Orleans, are made out of the ballast stones that used to counterbalance the weight of the humans that were brought over
Did
on
not
the
know that.
ships during the transatlantic slave, the Middle Passage. And so Charleston was one of the biggest ports. Over 40% of the humans that were kidnapped and brought over to the U.S. soil came through the Charleston port. And so when they would offload their cargo of humans from the continent, they would have these ballast stones that had been on the ships to counterbalance the weight, and they didn't need the stones anymore because their hulls were empty. So these cobblestones would just pile up, and they ended up starting to use them to line the streets. So when you find yourself, if you find yourself in Charleston and you find yourself walking around the streets and you're walking on the cobblestone streets, you're literally walking on the stones
That's
that
what
were
that
on
vibration
those
feels like.
ships
That.
that came across the Middle Passage. So
Mm.
that's how deeply ingrained, and I'm trigger warning, I'm sorry to have been going into that storyline, but that's how deeply ingrained the narrative and the storytelling of the antebellum industrial complex is woven into places like Charleston and New Orleans and these cities, Savannah, the cities that these ships landed in and fed the chattel slavery movement for so long. And so it's important for us to know. I mean, I lived in Charleston for 22 years and I didn't find out about those cobblestones until like a year before I moved out of there. So it's like, you have to dig, you have to really dig, because whiteness is really good at weaving these narratives into the tapestry that you don't even know that you're propagating until,
Yeah, I'm just learning about that today, and it just reminds me of a friend who did take me on a tour through the South, and being on that land and in that continent, I could feel the weight of the communities that existed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you think about grounding, excuse me, and if you think about existing on a spiritual, like in a very empathetic plane, that makes so much sense as to why I felt so heavy and so pulled down in those communities. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's like really deep. And I also remember seeing the bolts that they used to chain people to. I thought that they were horse holders, but they weren't. They were people holders. And so yeah, there's a lot of history that I'm glad that Black history allows us to celebrate the things that in our U.S. Development and evolution that were good and helpful for people.
Well, one of the other ahas that I had that I wanted to just offer up for folks who may look like me and haven't really unpacked this is, in Charleston, they opened a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, the International African American Museum.
Oh, cool.
And they built it on the site of Gadsden's Wharf, which my friend Tamika Gadsden, her last name is a name that has been in Charleston a long time. And
that's honoring. That's a little Black history.
Yes.
Click.
Yeah. She is
Yes,
Charleston.
she
So
is
when people try to
Charleston.
say, go back to where you came from, she's no,
I'm here.
Gadsden. I'm here. So anyway, they built the IAM, which is the International African American Museum, on the side of Gadsden's Wharf, which I appreciate. They were, trying to reclaim and I feel like that's what they were trying to do, doing that, and that, I think, a sacred spot. But what was interesting to me was something that I didn't have an awareness about, that I learned as I was listening to the chatter around the building of this museum. Was there were people that were protesting. Some of the people that I was in circles with in Charleston were protesting the museum because they didn't like the fact that the stories started with the people that they were trying to honor as enslaved. And it was an opportunity, which I hadn't thought of until I heard Dr. Millicent Brown talking about this, that it was an opportunity for us to remember and realize, maybe learn for the first time, that every human that was brought over in the Middle Passage did not start as a slave. They became a slave because we made them slaves. They were doctors and, engineers and lawyers and parents and
Birthgivers and
all of the, so I'm weaving this back to the inventors that we started this conversation with, because
Absolutely.
they had all those skills before we stole them, before we kidnapped them and put them on ships and brought them over and completely rewrote what they were able to accomplish because we just made them slaves. And I have not been to the International African American Museum. It opened after I left.
We should make a trip. You know,
that might be that would be interesting. I would very much go back to Charleston with you.
Right?
I don't know. I don't go back very often because that's but I would go back with you.
Ooh, that might be something to do. Mm-hmm.
And because that is one of the biggest pieces for me about Black history, is that the people that we kidnapped and brought over here did not start as slaves. We made them slaves. My ancestors made them slaves. And so that was I think it was a missed opportunity for the museum. And I don't know, maybe they shifted it. I don't know. I know that was one of the biggest pushbacks that Dr. Millicent Brown, who was she was the main student listed in the lawsuit that got the South Carolina schools desegregated. So she's an amazing human. And I was so lucky to have been able to learn from her and listen to her. So she's still with us. I don't mean to say was as if she's left this plane. But anyway, I wanted to speak into that because that all loops back to that inventor piece, that it is the story of this country that stopped us from understanding the immeasurable gifts that the Black humans that we brought over and their descendants have given to this country. And so that's why Black History Month is still so friggin' important and why we care about it. So,
and that is it. And with that, we're going to clock that. Let's clock that out. Clock out for Black History Month and see
so learn something new. Learn something new. If you look like me and you've heard anything in this episode that we're like, I didn't know that, learn something new this month.
And learn something new if you look like me too. There's always more to learn.
Yeah, it is. It is important. It is important. But
see you again.
Yes. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water.
See you next time.